7 brides, 7 departures. 7 times Elias Boone had stood at this cabin door and watched Hope walk away down the mountain trail without looking back. The 8th woman was arriving today, and he'd already accepted she'd leave too. He didn't pray anymore. Didn't even want her to like him. He just wanted someone tough enough to last one winter, just one, because the loneliness up here wasn't poetic or noble. It was a slow rot that made you forget how to talk, how to laugh, how to be anything other than a man breaking ice off his beard at dawn. Before we begin, if you're watching this, drop a comment telling me what city you're from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The knock came at 3 in the afternoon, sharp and businesslike, like someone collecting a debt. Elias didn't move from the table where he sat repairing a harness buckle. He'd heard the horses 20 minutes ago, their hooves crunching through the February crust. He knew what this was. Another introduction. Another doomed attempt at pretending he was something other than what the mountains had made him. "Mr. Boone?" A man's voice, nasal and impatient. The broker's assistant, same one who'd brought the last 3. Elias set down the buckle and walked to the door, opened it just wide enough to see. The assistant, Wesley, or Wallace, something with a W, stood on the porch in a coat too thin for 10,000 feet. Behind him, still mounted, sat a woman. Not a girl. A woman. She didn't look at Elias. She was studying the cabin itself, her dark eyes tracking the chimney stones, the angle of the roof, the wood stacked against the north wall. Her face showed nothing. Not fear, not disappointment, not the forced cheerfulness the others had worn like badly fitted masks. "This is Miss Marisol Vega," the assistant said, his breath fogging in the cold. "From Santa Fe Territory. The arrangements were confirmed by letter." Elias looked at the woman. She looked back. "You're late," he said. "The pass was snowed in," she replied. Her voice was low and even, no accent he could place. "We waited 4 days. Should have turned back. We didn't." The assistant coughed. "If we could perhaps move this inside, it's rather—" "You can go," Elias said, still watching the woman. "Your job's done." "Mr. Boone, protocol requires that I said you can go." The assistant's face pinched, but he didn't argue. Men didn't argue much with Elias these days. He had the look of someone who'd stopped caring about most things, and that made people nervous. Marisol dismounted without help, dropping to the ground with practiced ease. She untied a canvas bag from behind her saddle and slung it over her shoulder. The assistant handed her a smaller parcel, muttered something Elias didn't catch, and turned his horse around. They watched him ride down the trail until the trees swallowed him. "You always that friendly?" Marisol asked. "You always that practical about being abandoned on a mountain?" She turned to face him fully. She was maybe 5'6", solid through the shoulders, with black hair pulled back tight enough to make your scalp hurt just looking at it. Her clothes were work clothes, canvas trousers, wool coat, boots that had seen miles. No jewelry, no frills. "I wasn't abandoned," she said. "I chose this." "Sure you did." "You think I don't know what I signed up for?" Elias leaned against the doorframe. "I think you know what they told you. That's different. They told me you'd already run off 7 women. They told me you live alone at the edge of nowhere, barely scrape by, and don't talk much. They told me you need a wife who can work, not one who needs taking care of." She paused. "That sound about right?" It did, which irritated him. "What'd they tell you about why the others left?" he asked. "They didn't. I didn't ask." "Why not?" "Because it doesn't matter. Whatever drove them off, either I'm different or I'm not. Knowing the details won't change that." Elias studied her. She didn't flinch under the scrutiny, didn't look away. Most people did. He'd learned over the years that sustained eye contact from a man his size made folks uncomfortable, made them want to smooth things over with words. But Marisol just waited, perfectly still, like she could stand there all day if needed. "You should know," he said finally. "This isn't what they promised you. None of it ever is." "What isn't?" "The life. The cabin. Me." "What did they promise?" "Doesn't matter. Whatever it was better than the reality." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. "You going to let me inside, or are we having this whole conversation in the cold?" He almost smiled. Almost. He stepped back and she walked past him into the cabin. Oops. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd stopped pretending. Functional, bare, clean enough to avoid sickness, but nowhere near welcoming. One room, maybe 20 by 24 feet. A stone fireplace on the north wall, already burning. A table he'd built from pine planks. 2 chairs that didn't match. A narrow bed in the corner with a frame made from lodgepole pine and a mattress that crackled with corn husks when you moved. Shelves holding tins, jars, a few books with cracked spines. Traps and tools hanging from pegs. One small window facing east. Marisol set her bag down and did a slow turn, taking it in. "Where do the others sleep?" she asked. "There are no others." "Just you?" "Just me." She nodded, processing. "The broker said you run livestock. 12 goats, 4 sheep, 2 cows, chicken coop out back, but the hawks got most of them last month. Garden was. Ground's frozen now. I keep root vegetables in the cellar." "How do you make money?" "Pelts mostly. Beaver, marten if I'm lucky. Trade them down in Leadville twice a year. Sometimes I guide hunters if they pay enough." She walked to the fireplace, held her hands toward the heat. Her fingers were reddened from the cold but steady. "The broker said you built this yourself," she said. "I did." "How long did it take?" 3 summers. "You do the stonework too?" "All of it." She crouched down, examining the mortar joints. Ran her fingers along the edge where stone met wood. "It's good work. It keeps the wind out." "That's not what I said." She stood and turned to face him. "I need to know the arrangement. They told me one thing, but I want to hear it from you." Elias took off his coat and hung it on a peg. "What'd they tell you?" "Room, board, and protection in exchange for work. Marriage in name to make it legal and respectable, but the rest is negotiable between us." She paused. "That accurate?" "More or less." "Which part's less?" He walked to the table and sat down, suddenly tired. "The part where they make it sound like a business deal, like you can negotiate loneliness, like you can contract out the empty spaces." Marisol came and sat across from him. "You wanted a wife or a business partner?" "I wanted someone who wouldn't leave." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." She leaned back in the chair, which creaked under her weight. "Let me tell you what I want, and you tell me if we've got a problem." "Go ahead." "I want safety. Not from you, from everything else. I've spent 28 years moving from place to place, dependent on men who thought providing a roof meant owning what happened under it. I'm done with that. I want a place that's mine, even if I have to share it. I want work that matters, and space to breathe. I don't care if it's hard. I care that it's mine." She locked eyes with him. "I don't need you to love me. I don't need you to even like me. But I need you to be honest, to pull your weight, and to leave me alone when I ask. Can you do that?" Elias felt something shift in his chest, some tight knot loosening just slightly. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." "Then we don't have a problem. You might feel different in a week." "I might, but I doubt it." "Why?" "Because I know what I'm looking at. You're not the first hard man I've met, and this isn't the first hard place I've been. The difference is, this time I chose it." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the gap between the cabin and the wood pile. "You hungry?" Elias asked. "Starving." "There's venison stew from yesterday. Probably still good." "Probably. It's been cold. Should be fine." She almost smiled. "That's reassuring." He got up and ladled stew into 2 bowls, handed her one with a spoon. They ate without talking. The stew was fine, gamey and thick, flavored with wild onions and the last of his black pepper. She ate like someone who'd known hunger, efficient and focused. When she finished, she set the bowl down and looked around again. "Where do I sleep?" she asked. The question hung there, heavier than it should have been. "Bed's yours," Elias said. "I'll take the floor by the fire." "That's not sustainable." "It'll work for now." "For how long?" "However long it takes." "For what?" He didn't answer. Didn't know how to explain that the bed wasn't about chivalry or tradition. It was about distance. About not forcing something that might break before it even started. She seemed to understand anyway. "All right," she said. "For now." Quote, "That first night sets the pattern." Elias gave her the bed and made up a bedroll near the fire. She didn't argue, just unpacked her few belongings and arranged them on the shelf he'd cleared. A change of clothes, a small wooden box she didn't open, a knife with a worn handle, a book with no title on the spine. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning new steps. He banked the fire. She washed the bowls. He checked the door latch. She shook out the blankets. When she finally lay down, she said, "Thank you." He grunted from his bedroll. "I mean it," she said. "For the bed." "It's just a bed." "It's not. But all right." She fell asleep fast. He could tell by the change in her breathing. Elias lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling beams he'd adzed by hand, thinking about the woman 10 feet away who'd called his stonework good and meant it. He didn't let himself hope. Hope was what made the others hurt so much when they left. Hope was the enemy. But he did let himself think that maybe, just maybe, this one was different. Morning came blue and brutal. Elias woke before dawn out of habit, built up the fire, and started coffee. Marisol stirred when the smell hit, but didn't get up right away. When she finally emerged from the blankets, her hair was loose around her shoulders, black and heavy. "Morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Morning. What time is it?" "Around 6. "What needs doing?" He poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "Stock needs feeding, water needs hauling, firewood needs splitting. Show me." So he did. They worked through the morning in silence, Elias demonstrating and Marisol absorbing. She learned fast, didn't need things repeated, didn't ask stupid questions. When he showed her how to break the ice on the water trough, she studied the technique and then did it herself. 3 solid strikes with the blunt end of the axe. The animals watched her with the same wary interest Elias felt. The goats especially, who were particular about strangers. But she approached them calmly, let them sniff her hands, spoke to them in a low, steady voice that seemed to settle them. "You work with animals before?" Elias asked. "Grew up on a ranch, long time ago." "Where?" "South of Santa Fe, before it was sold." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. By midday, they'd finished the basic chores. Elias was splitting wood when Marisol came around the corner of the cabin carrying the water buckets, both full. "Where does this go?" she asked. He pointed to the barrel by the door. She dumped them in, set the buckets down, and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "You do this every day?" she asked. "Twice if it's cooking day." "How far's the creek?" "Quarter mile." She looked down the trail where it disappeared into the trees. "That's a lot of walking." "It's what there is." She nodded slowly, like she was calculating something. "We could rig a sled, pull more water at once." "Thought about it. Ground's too rough." "Not if you clear a proper path. Pack it down. Maybe lay some logs in the bad spots." Elias stopped splitting and looked at her. "That's a week's work, minimum." "So, we've got time. Might not be worth it." "Why not?" "Because you might not stay." The words came out harder than he'd intended. Marisol's expression didn't change. "If I leave," she said, "it won't be because hauling water was too hard." They stared at each other. The axe hung loose in Elias's hands. "Fair enough," he said finally. She picked up the buckets and headed back toward the creek. He watched her go, then returned to splitting wood, putting more force into it than necessary. That night, Marisol cooked. Elias came in from checking the livestock to find her at the fireplace, working with the cast iron skillet. The smell hit him first. Onions and rendered fat, something he couldn't quite place. "What is that?" he asked. "Potatoes and eggs. I found both in your stores." "I was saving those eggs." "For what?" He didn't have an answer. She smiled slightly and kept cooking. The meal was simple, but better than anything he'd made in months. The potatoes were crispy at the edges, the eggs still soft in the middle. She'd found his last pinch of dried sage and used it. "Where'd you learn to cook?" he asked. "Same place I learned everything else, by watching and doing." "You're good at it." "I'm good at not starving. That's different." They ate in comfortable silence. After, Elias washed the dishes while Marisol sat at the table, examining the harness buckle he'd been repairing. "This is bronze," she said. "Yeah." "You make it?" "Bought it off a trader. It's old, older than me, probably." She turned it over in her hands. "Why bronze? Iron's cheaper." Because iron rusts, bronze just gets stronger. She set it down carefully. That's not true, you know. What? Bronze doesn't get stronger with age, it gets brittle. He looked at her. How do you know that? My father worked metal before the ranch failed. What happened to him? Died. Both parents did 5 years back. Fever took them within a week of each other. Sorry. Don't be. They're gone, and being sorry doesn't change it. Her tone wasn't harsh, just factual. Elias recognized it. The same flatness he heard in his own voice when people asked about his family. What'd you do after? He asked. Worked. Moved around, tried to find somewhere that felt less temporary. She paused. Didn't work out. Until now? We'll see. She stood and stretched, her back popping audibly. I'm going to turn in. Unless there's something else that needs doing. No, we're good. She nodded and moved toward the bed, then stopped and turned back. Elias? It was the first time she'd said his name. Yeah? Thank you for giving this a chance. I know you don't expect it to work, but I appreciate you trying anyway. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. She climbed into bed, and he took his place by the fire. Outside, the wind began to rise. The storm hit 3 days later. Elias had felt it coming, that peculiar pressure behind the eyes that meant serious weather. The animals felt it too, restless and vocal. He spent the morning securing everything that could blow away, reinforcing the chicken coop, moving extra firewood inside. Marisol worked alongside him without being asked, following his lead but anticipating needs. When he went for rope, she was already bringing it. When he started boarding up the east window, she held the plank steady. How bad? She asked. Bad enough. Scale of 1 to 10? 7, maybe 8. What's a 10? The kind that kills you. She didn't look worried, just focused. What else needs doing? They worked through the afternoon, racing the darkening sky. By the time the first flakes started falling, they were inside with the door barred and the livestock as protected as possible. Elias checked his supplies. Firewood for 5 days if they were careful, food for longer, water for a week. The animals had fodder and shelter. They'd survive. The question was whether the cabin would. It started gentle, fat flakes drifting down, almost peaceful. But within an hour, the wind picked up and the snow turned horizontal. By dark, it was a full whiteout, the wind screaming around the cabin like something alive and furious. Marisol sat at the table, reading her book by firelight. Elias paced, checking the door, the window, the chimney draw. Every gust made the whole structure groan. You should sit, Marisol said without looking up. I'm fine. You're making me nervous. He stopped. Sorry. How long do these usually last? 2 days? 3? Sometimes longer. And you've weathered them before? 5 winters worth. Then the cabin will hold. Probably. She closed her book. But you're not sure. I'm never sure. Every storm's different. A particularly strong gust hit, and the whole north wall shuddered. Dust sifted down from the rafters. Marisol stood and walked to the wall, pressed her hand against it. It's flexing, she said. Yeah. How much flex before it's a problem? I don't know. Never measured. She moved along the wall, testing different spots. You have extra bracing? Some. In the lean-to. Is it accessible? If we go out in this, we'll get lost 10 feet from the door. I didn't say go out. I said, is it accessible? He thought about it. Maybe. There's a rope I keep tied to the doorpost, runs to the lean-to. But in this wind, show me. They bundled up in every layer they had. Elias tied a rope around his waist, then around Marisol's, leaving 6 feet of slack between them. He opened the door just wide enough to slip through. The wind hit like a fist. Snow filled the air so thick he couldn't see his own feet. The cold bit through his coat in seconds. He felt for the guide rope, found it, gripped it hard. Behind him, Marisol's hand found his shoulder. She leaned close, shouting to be heard. How far? 30 feet. They moved together, hand over hand along the rope. The wind tried to tear them off it. Snow caked on Elias's beard, his eyelashes, filled his nose and mouth. His world shrank to the rope, the wind, the press of Marisol's hand on his back. The lean-to materialized out of the white. He fumbled the latch open, and they fell inside, gasping. Jesus, Marisol said. Elias didn't correct her. He was thinking the same thing. They found the lumber by feel, 4 6-foot lengths of rough pine he'd cut last summer. Working together in the near dark, they lashed the boards together into a makeshift brace, using all the rope they had except the guideline. Getting back was worse. The wind had shifted, blowing directly into their faces. Elias could barely breathe. Halfway back, Marisol stumbled and went down. He grabbed her coat, hauled her up. She got her feet under her and they pushed on. When they finally tumbled through the cabin door, they lay on the floor gasping for several minutes. That, Marisol said between breaths, was stupid. Yeah. We could have died. Yeah. Let's not do it again. Agreed. They laughed, exhausted and half frozen, and it felt good. But the night wasn't over. Around midnight, a section of the north wall began to separate from the roof. Elias heard it first, a groaning crack that made his stomach drop. He was on his feet before the second crack came. Get up, he told Marisol. She was already moving. They shoved the heavy table against the wall, braced it with the brace they'd made. Elias climbed on top of the table and pressed against the separation with his full weight, while Marisol worked below, driving wedges into the gap. For 2 hours they fought it, adjusting, reinforcing, improvising. The wall wanted to peel away. They wanted it to stay. It was that simple and that desperate. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, the separation stopped growing. The wedges held, the brace held. The wall, for now, held. They climbed down from the table, filthy with dust and splinters, and collapsed on the floor by the fire. That was close, Elias said. Marisol nodded, too tired to speak. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. After a while, she spoke. The others, she said. The 7 who left. Did they have to do things like this? No. Most of them left before the first real storm. Why? He thought about it. Because they realized what hard meant up here. It's one thing to imagine it. It's different when you're actually cold, actually scared, actually wondering if the cabin's going to come apart around you. And you think I'll leave too? I think everyone has a breaking point. She looked at him, her face smudged with dirt, her hair wild. You're probably right, but this isn't mine. Something in her voice made him believe her. They stayed there by the fire until dawn, talking in low voices about nothing important, childhood memories, stupid things they'd done, the time she'd broken her arm falling off a horse, the time he'd nearly drowned in a spring flood. When the light finally came, pale and thin through the boarded window, the storm was still blowing. But the cabin had held, and so had they. The storm lasted 4 days. By the second day, they'd fallen into a rhythm, feeding the fire, rationing food, checking the repairs, sleeping in shifts. The confined space forced a kind of intimacy neither of them asked for but both accepted. There was nowhere to hide, no way to avoid each other's presence. Elias learned that Marisol hummed when she was concentrating, that she chewed the inside of her cheek when she was worried, that she slept curled tight, like she was protecting something. Marisol learned that Elias talked to himself when he thought no one was listening, that he had nightmares but never made a sound, that he moved through the cabin with a deliberate heaviness, like he was trying to prove he was real. On the third day, the food ran low. They were down to hardtack, dried apples, and the last of the venison. Marisol suggested rationing further, but Elias shook his head. We eat what we need, he said. Storm can't last forever. You sure about that? No. But starving ourselves won't help. She accepted this without argument. That night, huddled close to the fire for warmth, she asked him about the 7th bride. What happened with her? Marisol asked. Elias stared into the flames. She was young, 19, maybe 20, from Boston, came out here thinking it'd be romantic. And she lasted 3 weeks. Cried every night. Wouldn't touch the animals because they smelled. Burned the food because she'd never cooked on an open fire. Nice girl, but completely unprepared. Did you try to make it work? Yeah, but you can't force someone to be something they're not. Marisol was quiet for a moment. What about the one before her? Widow from Kansas, tough as nails actually, made it through a whole winter. So what happened? She met a merchant from Denver who came through in spring, left with him a week later. Elias paused. Can't really blame her. He could offer her a real house, a real town, a real life. And you couldn't? This is the only life I have. Marisol shifted closer to the fire. Do you regret it? Staying up here? Sometimes. Less than I used to. Why? He looked at her. Because I built something. Maybe it's small and maybe it's rough, but it's mine. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody can take it away. Except a storm. Except a storm, he agreed. They sat in silence. Outside, the wind howled. I've been thinking, Marisol said eventually. After this is over, we should build a second room. Elias blinked. What? A second room, off the main cabin. It wouldn't take much. Just extend the north wall, add a partition, give us both some privacy. That's a month of work, minimum. So we take a month. Why? She looked at him directly. Because I'm staying, Elias. And if I'm staying, I want a space that's mine. Not borrowed. Mine. The words hit harder than they should have. No one had ever talked about staying before. Not past the first storm, not past the first hard week. You're serious, he said. Completely. You might change your mind when the snow melts and you see what else is out there. I've seen what else is out there. That's why I'm here. He wanted to argue, to protect himself from the disappointment when she inevitably left. But looking at her face in the firelight, stubborn, certain, unflinching, he couldn't find the words. All right, he said finally. We'll build a second room. She smiled then, and it changed her whole face. Good. On the fourth day, the storm broke. They woke to silence, the sudden, shocking absence of wind. Elias opened the door to a world transformed. Snow had drifted 15 feet high against the east side of the cabin. The lean-to was completely buried. The landscape was unrecognizable, all familiar shapes erased, but the sky was clear, painfully blue, and the sun was shining. They spent the day digging out, checking on the animals, all alive, though the chickens were traumatized, and assessing the damage. The north wall had held, but barely. They'd need to reinforce it properly before the next storm. That evening, exhausted and sunburned from the glare off the snow, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. You ever think about leaving? Marisol asked. Elias considered. Used to. First few years, I thought about it all the time, figured I'd made a mistake, that I wasn't cut out for this. What changed? I stopped thinking about whether I was cut out for it and just focused on surviving it. Turns out they're the same thing. She nodded slowly. Yeah, they are. They sat in companionable silence as the sky turned purple, then black. Stars emerged, so many you could barely see the dark between them. Elias? Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on this. On me being here. He looked at her. I haven't done anything worth thanking. You gave me a chance. That's more than most people get. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. But something in his chest loosened another degree, and for the first time in 7 failed attempts, he let himself think that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. The 8th bride had arrived. And against all odds, against all his carefully guarded expectations, she was still here. The week after the storm, they fell into work like people who'd been doing it together for years. Elias had expected awkwardness, some kind of adjustment period where they'd step on each other's toes and have to negotiate space. But Marisol moved through the daily routines with an efficiency that suggested she'd been studying him during those 4 days trapped inside. She knew which chores he hated most and took them without comment. She knew he liked his coffee dark enough to strip paint and started making it that way without asking. In return, he noticed things about her. The way she favored her left shoulder when lifting heavy loads. How she went quiet in the late afternoon, retreating into herself for an hour before supper. That she couldn't stand waste. Every scrap of food, every piece of leather, every bent nail got saved and repurposed. They worked on the north wall first. The temporary bracing had held, but it needed proper reinforcement before the next weather rolled through. Elias tore out the damaged section while Marisol prepared new timber, stripping bark and notching joints with a hand axe that had belonged to her father. You're good with that, Elias said, watching her work. Had a lot of practice. She didn't look up from the notch she was cutting. My father used to say if you couldn't maintain your own tools and fix your own mistakes, you had no business making things. Smart man. He was, just unlucky. They worked in silence for a while, the sound of axe on wood providing rhythm. Then Marisol stopped and straightened, rolling her shoulders. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Why did you really stay up here? After the first winter, after you knew how hard it was, why not go somewhere easier? Elias set down the timber he'd been carrying. The question wasn't new. He'd asked himself the same thing 100 times, but no one else had ever asked it directly. You want the real answer or the one that makes me sound better? The real one. He leaned against the cabin wall, looking out at the mountains that had become both prison and sanctuary. Because down there, in the towns, I was just another person failing at life. Up here, when I fail, it's honest. The mountain doesn't care if I'm good enough or smart enough or worthy enough. It just is what it is, and I either handle it or I don't. That's not an answer. That's an excuse. Her bluntness caught him off guard. Excuse for what? For hiding. She met his eyes. You came up here because you were running from something, and you stayed because it's easier to fail alone than to fail in front of other people. Anger flashed through him, hot and defensive. You don't know anything about me. I know you've convinced yourself that loneliness is somehow nobler than trying. I know you've built this whole life around the idea that you're better off alone because then no one can disappoint you. She paused. I know because I've done the exact same thing. The anger drained away, leaving something raw behind. So what's your excuse? He asked. Same as yours. Different details, same cowardice. She picked up the axe again. Difference is, I'm trying to stop running. Question is whether you are. She went back to work, and Elias stood there feeling like he'd been gutted and reassembled slightly wrong. No one had talked to him like that in years. Part of him wanted to tell her to mind her own business, to keep her psychological assessments to herself, but a larger part knew she was right. He picked up his timber and got back to work. That night, he didn't sleep by the fire. He pulled together enough scraps to make a second bedroll and placed it on the opposite side of the cabin, near the shelves. Not close to her bed, but not deliberately distant either. Just separate. Marisol noticed but didn't comment. She did, however, give him an extra blanket without being asked. The north wall took them 6 days to fully repair. By the end, it was stronger than it had been originally, reinforced with cross-bracing and sealed with fresh oakum Elias had been saving. They stood back and looked at their work in the fading afternoon light. It'll hold, Marisol said. Yeah. You sound surprised. I am, a little. Usually when I fix something, it breaks again in a different spot. That's because you've been doing everything alone. 2 people see things 1 person misses. She was right about that too. During the repair, she'd caught 3 places where his measurements were off, 2 spots where the timber was starting to rot, and 1 section where the original chinking had never been properly seated. Each time, she'd pointed it out matter-of-factly, without judgment, and they'd fixed it together. We should celebrate, she said. Celebrate what? Not dying in our sleep when the wall collapsed. He almost smiled. What'd you have in mind? You got any whiskey hidden somewhere? Maybe. Maybe yes or maybe no. Maybe I've got half a bottle I was saving for a special occasion. And surviving a 4-day blizzard and repairing a wall doesn't qualify? He considered. I suppose it does. The whiskey was rough, corn liquor he'd traded for 2 years ago and promptly forgotten about. They sat on the porch in the last of the daylight, passing the bottle back and forth. Marisol drank like someone who'd learned young, smooth pulls that didn't make her cough. This is terrible, she said, wiping her mouth. I know. Why'd you keep it? Seemed wasteful to throw it out. Drinking it seems wasteful too. We could stop. She took another drink and passed him the bottle. I didn't say that. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun disappear behind the western peaks. The sky went through its evening routine, gold to orange to purple to that particular shade of blue that only existed at altitude. You ever miss people? Marisol asked. Sometimes. You? All the time. She paused. But I miss the idea of them more than the actual people. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does. I keep thinking I should want community, want neighbors and friends and all that. But when I actually had those things, they felt like obligations, like parts I was supposed to play. Elias took a drink. The whiskey burned going down, settled warm in his stomach. That's why I left Denver. Everyone expected me to be something I wasn't. What'd they expect? Respectable? Settled? Someone who showed up on time and cared about the right things. And you didn't? I tried. For almost 2 years I tried. Worked in a mill, rented a room, went to church on Sundays, did everything I was supposed to do. What happened? He turned the bottle in his hands. One day I woke up and realized I'd rather be cold and hungry and alone than spend one more day pretending to be someone I wasn't. So I left. Any regrets? About leaving? No, about how I left, maybe. There was a woman, nothing serious, but she thought it might be. I didn't tell her I was going, just packed a bag and walked out before dawn. That was cowardly. I know. But honest. He looked at her. Those things aren't mutually exclusive? Not even a little bit. She took the bottle back. I did something similar. There was a man in Santa Fe, a blacksmith, good man, kind, wanted to marry me. Had a whole plan. House, kids, steady income. Everything a person's supposed to want. You said no? I said yes. That surprised him. What happened? I left 3 days before the wedding, took everything I owned and caught a stage north, didn't even leave a note. Why? Because I kept having this dream where I woke up 20 years later and couldn't remember who I'd been before I became his wife. Like I'd traded myself for security and forgot to check if it was a fair trade. Elias understood that more than he wanted to admit. He come after you? No, he was too decent for that. Probably just counted himself lucky he found out before the ceremony. She drank again, longer this time. I've spent the last 3 years moving around, telling myself I was looking for something better. But really, I was just running from the fact that I'd given up something good because I was too scared to trust it. You think that's what you're doing here? She looked at him directly. I think I'm done running. Whether that means I stay here forever or just long enough to figure out what comes next, I don't know. But I'm tired of making decisions out of fear. The honesty of it hit him hard. He wanted to tell her he felt the same way, that he was tired of building walls and pushing people away, that maybe this time could be different. But the words stuck in his throat, too big and too vulnerable to let out. Instead, he said, "We should probably pace ourselves on this whiskey." She laughed, startled and genuine. Yeah, probably. They finished the bottle anyway. The next morning arrived with matching headaches and a mutual agreement to never speak of it again. They worked through the day in groggy silence, accomplishing half of what they normally would. By evening, both of them were human again. Tomorrow we should check the trap line, Elias said over supper. Marisol looked up from her stew. You have traps set? 6 of them, up along the ridge. Haven't checked them since before the storm. That's almost 2 weeks. I know, probably lost whatever was in them, but the traps themselves are worth recovering. How long does it take? Full day there and back. We'd have to start early. She nodded slowly. Both of us going? If you want, otherwise I can go alone. What would I do here? Watch the stock. Keep the fire going. Same as any other day. She set down her spoon. I want to go. Something in her tone made him look closer. You sure? I didn't come up here to sit in a cabin. If you're working the trap line, I should know how it's done. He couldn't argue with that logic. All right, we leave at dawn. They packed light, dried meat, hardtack, water, spare rope, and Elias's rifle. The morning was cold and clear, their breath fogging in the pre-dawn dark. They walked single file up the trail, Elias leading. The ridge was a 3-hour climb, steep enough in places that they had to use their hands. Marisol kept pace without complaint, though he could hear her breathing hard on the worst sections. When they finally crested the top, she bent over with her hands on her knees, sucking air. You all right? Elias asked. Fine, just not used to the altitude yet. Take your time. She straightened after a minute, looking around. From up here, you could see for miles, valley below, mountains in every direction, sky so big it made you feel like an ant. It's beautiful, she said. It is. You come up here a lot? Used to. Less now. Why less? He shrugged. Gets lonely, I guess. Beauty's better when you can share it. She glanced at him, something shifting in her expression, but didn't comment. The first 3 traps were empty, springs rusted from weather and time. Elias reset them methodically while Marisol watched and learned. The 4th trap held the frozen remains of a fox, too far gone to be worth anything. He freed the carcass and reset the trap. The 5th trap was missing entirely. Could an animal have taken it? Marisol asked. Maybe. Or someone else found it. He studied the ground. Can't tell. Snow's covered everything. They found the sixth trap 50 yards from where it should have been, dragged there by something large enough to move the whole assembly. When they got close enough to see it clearly, Elias stopped short. A wolf. Or what was left of one. The animal had been dead for days, frozen in the trap's jaws. Its fur was gray-black and matted with ice and blood. One of its legs had been torn nearly off in its attempt to escape. Marisol made a small sound. "Don't look if you don't want to," Elias said. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. He could see it in the way she held herself, rigid and careful. He approached the trap and knelt beside it. The wolf had been young, maybe 2 years old. Male. It had fought hard. The ground around the trap was torn up, and there were marks where it had tried to chew through the chain. "This is what trapping is," he said quietly. "It's not clean. Nothing about it is clean." "I know." "Do you?" She looked at him. "You think I'm squeamish?" "I think there's a difference between knowing something in theory and seeing it with your own eyes." She came closer, forcing herself to look. "How long did it take to die?" "Hard to say. Could have been hours. Could have been days." "That's cruel." "It is." "You don't feel bad about it?" Elias freed the wolf from the trap, handling the body with more care than necessary. "I feel bad every time. But I also need the pelts to survive. So I do it anyway. And I try to check the traps often enough that the suffering is minimal." "But you didn't this time." The accusation stung because it was true. "No, I didn't." He buried the wolf in the snow, using rocks to keep scavengers from digging it up. It wasn't much, but it felt necessary. When he finished, Marisol was standing apart, arms crossed, looking out at the valley. "You want to head back?" he asked. "No, I want to understand this." "Understand what?" "How you reconcile it, the beauty and the cruelty. How you live up here and see both every day and not go crazy from the contradiction." He joined her at the edge, both of them looking out at the vast empty landscape. "You don't reconcile it," he said. "You just accept that both things are true. The mountains are beautiful and they're brutal. Life up here is simple and it's hard. You can love something and still acknowledge that it costs you." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. "The blacksmith I left, the one in Santa Fe, he wanted to protect me from hard things. Kept saying I deserved an easy life, that I shouldn't have to work so hard. And I know he meant well, but it felt like he was trying to sand down all the rough parts of me until I fit into his idea of what a wife should be. And you didn't want that. I didn't want to be protected from reality. I wanted to be strong enough to handle it." She looked at him. "That's why I came here. Not because I think hardship is noble, but because I'd rather face difficult truths than comfortable lies." Elias felt something shift in his chest, a recognition so deep it was almost painful. "Yeah," he said, "I get that." They stood there together, two people who'd chosen hard truths over easy comfort, and for the first time since the 7 failures before her, Elias felt like he might not be doing this alone. The walk back took longer. They were both tired, and Marisol stumbled twice on the descent. The second time, Elias caught her arm. "Careful." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted." "So are you." "I'm used to it." She pulled her arm free, irritated. "I'm not some delicate thing that needs constant watching. I know that." "Then stop treating me like I am." He stepped back, hands raised. "All right, fair enough." They finished the descent in tense silence. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting, and both of them were running on empty. Elias fed the animals while Marisol started a fire and put on water for coffee. When he came inside, she was sitting at the table with her head in her hands. "You okay?" he asked. "Just tired." He poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. "I wasn't trying to coddle you up there." "I know." "Then why'd you bite my head off?" She lifted her head and looked at him. "Because I've spent most of my life having men tell me what I can and can't handle. And even when they mean well, even when they're trying to help, it feels like they're saying I'm not capable of judging my own limits. That's not what I was doing. I know, but old habits die hard." He sipped his coffee, considering. "You need me to back off more?" "Sometimes. Other times I need you to push. The trick is figuring out which is which. How am I supposed to know? You ask, or you pay attention, or you trust that I'll tell you when you get it wrong." It was reasonable, but it also required a level of communication that felt foreign to both of them. Still, He could see she was trying to meet him halfway. "All right," he said, "I'll try. That's all I'm asking." They drank their coffee in silence, the tension draining away. Outside, full dark had fallen, and the temperature was dropping fast. "We should eat," Marisol said eventually. "Not much left. I'll have to hunt soon. Can you spare the time?" "Don't have a choice. We go through the rest of the venison in a week, maybe less." She stood and started pulling together a meal from what they had. Elias watched her move around the small space, economical and certain, and felt the strange sensation of being comfortable in someone else's presence. It was unfamiliar enough to be almost frightening. "Marisol?" "Yeah?" "Today, when you said you wanted to understand, did you? Understand, I mean." She paused in her work. "Some of it. The wolf still bothers me. It should. The day it doesn't is the day you've lost something important." She turned to face him. "You feel that way about all of it? The trapping, the hunting, the killing?" "Every time. But I also know that feeling bad doesn't change necessity. So I do what needs doing, and I try not to waste what's given." "That's a strange kind of morality." "It's the only kind that works up here." She nodded slowly and went back to cooking. They ate a sparse meal of beans and the last of the bread, both of them too tired to make conversation. When they finished, Marisol washed the dishes while Elias checked the door and windows. "I'm going to turn in early," she said. "Yeah, me too." They moved to their separate sleeping spaces. Elias was almost asleep when her voice came out of the darkness. "Elias?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for taking me up there today, for letting me see the real thing, not some sanitized version." "You're welcome. And I'm sorry I snapped at you." "Already forgotten." He heard her shift in her bed. "You're a terrible liar." Despite himself, he smiled. "I know." Silence settled over the cabin. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the newly reinforced north wall. It held firm. Everything held firm. For now, that was enough. The days that followed established a new normal. They worked together on the endless maintenance the cabin required, fell into an easy division of labor based on skill rather than stubbornness. Marisol proved better at fine work, repairing harnesses, mending clothes, fixing tools. Elias handled the heavy jobs, chopping wood, hauling water, anything that required brute strength. They talked more, though never about anything too deep. Surface things mostly, stories from their past that felt safe to share, opinions on practical matters, occasional arguments about the best way to accomplish tasks. But underneath the surface, something was building, a foundation maybe, or the beginning of one. Neither of them acknowledged it directly, too wary of jinxing whatever fragile thing was forming between them. 3 weeks after the storm, Elias woke to find Marisol already up and dressed, standing at the window. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing, just thinking." He joined her at the window. The sun was just clearing the eastern ridge, painting everything gold. "About what?" She was quiet for a moment. "About whether I've ever been this close to something working." "Something?" "This, us, whatever we're building here." His heart kicked hard against his ribs. "And have you?" "No." She looked at him. "That scares me." "Me too." "But you're still here." "So are you." She smiled slightly. "Yeah, I am." They stood together watching the sun climb, two damaged people learning to trust in small increments, and outside the window the mountains watched back, indifferent and eternal. The conversation at the window didn't lead anywhere that morning. They went back to work, to the familiar rhythms that had become their shared language. But something had shifted, some acknowledgement that they were both aware of what was happening between them, even if neither knew what to do about it. 2 days later, Elias shot an elk. He'd been tracking it since dawn, moving through the forest with the patience that came from years of necessity. The animal was a young bull, maybe 3 years old, grazing in a clearing 2 miles from the cabin. One clean shot through the chest. It dropped without suffering. The hard part was getting it back. He field-dressed it where it fell, working quickly in the cold. Even gutted, the carcass had to weigh 400 pounds. Too much for one person to move. He took what meat he could carry and hiked back to get Marisol. She was chopping kindling when he emerged from the tree line, his coat stained dark with blood. "You're hurt," she said, dropping the axe. "It's not mine." I got an elk. Her eyes widened. How big? Big enough we'll need the sled and both of us to bring it in. They worked through the afternoon, hauling the carcass back in sections. It took 3 trips, both of them soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature. By the time they got the last of it back to the cabin, the sun was setting and they were both shaking with exhaustion. We need to process it tonight, Elias said. Can't let it freeze in large pieces or we'll never get it apart. Marisol looked at the pile of meat, then at him. Show me what to do. They worked by firelight and lantern, cutting and sorting. Elias demonstrated the first few cuts, then handed her a knife and let her take over. She worked carefully, asking questions when she wasn't sure, learning as she went. Around midnight, covered in blood and grease, they finally finished. The meat was hung in the cold room, the organs were sorted, the bones were saved for stock. Nothing wasted. Marisol sat down hard on the porch steps, too tired to make it inside. Elias joined her, both of them too filthy to care. I've never done anything like that before, she said. You did good. I feel like I should be bothered by it. The blood, the cutting, all of it. Are you? She thought about it. No, just tired. That's because it was necessary. There's a difference between killing for sport and killing to survive. The wolf in the trap? That was necessary too? Yeah, it doesn't make it easier, but yeah. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm starting to understand why the others left. Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach. Yeah? Not because it's too hard, because it requires you to be someone you might not like very much. Someone who can look at suffering and say, that's necessary, and mean it. And you don't want to be that person? I didn't say that. She looked at him. I said I understand why others wouldn't. There's a cost to this life that has nothing to do with comfort. He knew what she meant. Every winter he spent alone had chipped away at something, not his ability to survive, but his ability to care about anything beyond survival. He'd felt himself getting harder, colder, more willing to accept cruelty as inevitable. You think I'm too far gone? He asked. What? You think I've lost whatever makes a person decent? She studied his face. No, I think you're fighting like hell not to lose it, and that's why you feel guilty about the wolf. The observation hit harder than it should have. He'd spent years telling himself that guilt was weakness, that survival required a certain ruthlessness. But maybe Marisol was right. Maybe the guilt was the part worth keeping. We should clean up, he said, standing. Elias? He turned back. I'm not going anywhere, she said quietly, in case you were wondering. I wasn't. Liar. He almost smiled. Yeah, I was. They washed in water heated over the fire, taking turns in the small space. When Marisol finished, she hung her wet clothes by the hearth and changed into her spare outfit, canvas trousers and a wool shirt that had belonged to her father. You want first watch on the meat? Elias asked. Watch? Bears sometimes smell blood and come investigating. Someone needs to stay awake, keep the fire high. I'll take first shift. Wake me in 4 hours? 3. You need the sleep. She looked like she might argue, then nodded. 3 hours. She climbed into bed while Elias settled by the fire with his rifle across his knees. Outside, the night was still and cold. No wind, no sound except the occasional crack of settling timber. He was almost dozing when Marisol spoke from the darkness. Can I ask you something personal? Depends on the question. The 7 before me. Did you ever actually want any of them to stay? He considered lying, then decided against it. The first 2, maybe. After that, I think I was just going through the motions, telling myself I was trying while secretly hoping they'd leave so I could confirm what I already believed. Which was? That I was better off alone. And now? Now I don't know what I believe. She was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she said, I left the blacksmith because I was afraid of becoming someone I didn't recognize. Someone who'd traded all her rough edges for security and woke up one day having forgotten how to be anything except grateful. You told me that already. I know, but I didn't tell you the rest. He waited. The rest is that I've been alone ever since, telling myself I was protecting my independence. But really, I was just too scared to try again. Too scared to risk becoming that diminished version of myself. What changed? Nothing changed. I'm still scared, but I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life running from things that might hurt me. Elias understood that completely. So you came here. So I came here. To the most isolated, difficult, unforgiving place I could find, with a man who'd already failed at this 7 times. She laughed softly. When you say it out loud, it sounds insane. It is insane. Yeah. But you're still here. Still here. He listened to her breathing slow and deepen as she drifted off. Outside, something moved through the trees. Probably deer, maybe elk. Nothing threatening. The fire crackled and popped, throwing shadows across the ceiling. 3 hours later, he woke her for her shift. They passed each other in the small space, and her hand brushed his arm. Anything happen? She asked. Nothing. It's quiet. Good. He climbed into his bedroll and was asleep in minutes. The meat lasted them through the rest of winter and into early spring. They rationed carefully, supplementing with what Elias could trap and what little they had stored. It wasn't luxury, but it was enough. As the days grew longer and the snow began to retreat from the southern slopes, they started planning the second room Marisol had mentioned. They spent evenings sketching layouts on scraps of paper, arguing about dimensions and placement. It should go here, Marisol said, pointing to the east wall. Morning light. That's the coldest side of the cabin. So we insulate it better. With what? We barely have enough material to keep the main room warm. Then we get more material. You said you go down to Leadville in spring? To trade pelts, yeah. So we use some of that money for lumber and insulation. Elias shook his head. That money's for supplies. Food, ammunition, things we need to survive. This is something we need. A second room is not a need. It is if I'm staying. The words hung between them. She'd said it before, but this felt different, more definite. You're really staying, he said. I told you I was. People say a lot of things. She set down the paper and looked at him directly. Do you want me to stay or not? The question was simple. The answer should have been too. But Elias found himself frozen, caught between want and fear. I want you to stay, he said finally, but I need you to be sure. I can't do this again. Get used to someone being here and then watch them leave. I'm not them. I know that. But it doesn't change the fact that this is hard and it's not getting easier, and there are going to be days when you wake up and wonder what the hell you're doing in the middle of nowhere with someone you barely know. I wonder that every morning. And I get up anyway. She reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact, and the touch sent something electric through him. I'm not asking you to trust me completely, she said. I'm just asking you to trust me enough to build a room. Can you do that? He looked down at their joined hands, hers smaller but just as calloused, marked by the same kind of work that had shaped his. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Her smile was small but genuine. Good. They started work on the room the following week. Elias felled trees while Marisol stripped bark and prepared the timber. They worked through the warming days, building the frame one piece at a time. It was slower than the original cabin had been. Elias had been younger then, more desperate to prove something. Now he was just tired. But Marisol kept them moving forward. When he wanted to quit for the day, she'd suggest 1 more hour. When he got frustrated with a joint that wouldn't seat properly, she'd take over and find a solution. She had a way of making the impossible feel merely difficult. One afternoon, 3 weeks into the construction, Elias was fitting roof beams when she called up to him. Someone's coming. He looked down to see her pointing down the trail. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, was a rider. Elias climbed down and retrieved his rifle from the cabin. Visitors were rare up here and rarely good news. They waited on the porch as the rider approached. It was the broker's assistant, Wesley or Wallace, whatever his name was, looking even more uncomfortable than usual. Mr. Boone, he said, dismounting. Miss Vega. What do you want? Elias asked. The assistant cleared his throat nervously. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Pritchard. He's sent correspondence. He held out a letter. Elias took it but didn't open it. That all? He also wanted me to check on the arrangement, make sure everything is satisfactory. It's fine. You can go. The assistant shifted his weight. I'm required to speak with Miss Vega privately, to ensure she's here of her own volition. Marisol stepped forward. I'm here of my own volition. You can tell Mr. Pritchard that I'm staying. I still need to speak with you alone. It's policy. Elias felt anger rising, but Marisol put a hand on his arm. It's fine, she said. Let him do his job. She walked with the assistant toward the creek, leaving Elias on the porch with the unopened letter. He watched them go, jaw tight, trying not to imagine what lies the assistant might be filling her head with. How much easier life would be down in the towns. How she didn't have to settle for this. 10 minutes later, they returned. Marisol looked irritated but unshaken. We're done here, she told the assistant. Miss Vega, if you'd like to reconsider, I said we're done. The assistant looked at Elias, then back at Marisol. Very well. I'll report that the arrangement is proceeding as planned. He mounted his horse and rode away without another word. What'd he say to you? Elias asked. The usual. Asked if I was being mistreated, if I wanted to leave, offered to take me back to town. And I told him to mind his own business. She paused. Are you going to open that letter? Elias looked down at the envelope in his hand. He'd almost forgotten about it. He broke the seal and read. The letter was from Pritchard himself, written in cramped formal script. It informed Elias that due to the unusual success of this latest arrangement, the agency was prepared to offer additional candidates for placement. There was a waiting list of women seeking similar situations, and given Elias's property and evident capability to provide, perhaps he might consider taking on a second or even third bride. He read it twice, making sure he understood correctly. Then he handed it to Marisol. She scanned it quickly, her expression darkening. When she finished, she walked to the fire and dropped it in. They watched it burn together. I'm writing him back, she said. To say what? To tell him that this arrangement is closed, that I'm not one of multiple options, and if he sends anyone else up here, I'll personally escort them back down. Elias felt something warm bloom in his chest. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. Because if I don't, you're going to spend the next 6 months wondering if I actually want to be here, or if I'm just staying until someone better comes along. That's not, it is exactly what you're thinking. I can see it on your face. She was right, which made it worse. Fine, he said. Write him back. I will. And while you're at it, tell him his assistant is a weasel. She almost smiled. I'll keep that part to myself. That evening, she wrote the letter by candlelight while Elias pretended to work on harness repairs. When she finished, she sealed it and set it aside. What'd you say? He asked. That the arrangement is permanent and exclusive, that no further candidates should be sent, that his services are no longer required. He's not going to like that. I don't care what he likes. He might show up himself, try to talk you out of it. She looked at him steadily. Let him try. The certainty in her voice settled something in Elias. He set down the harness and crossed to where she sat. Why? He asked. Why what? Why are you doing this? You could have better, easier, someone who isn't half broken and buried in the middle of nowhere? You think you're half broken? I know I am. She stood to face him. Then we match, because so am I. And I'd rather be broken with someone who's honest about it than whole with someone who pretends. They were standing close enough that he could smell the wood smoke in her hair, see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. His heart was pounding hard enough he was sure she could hear it. Marisol, don't, she said quietly. Don't apologize or explain or try to talk me out of this. I'm here because I want to be, because, for the first time in my life, I'm building something that's mine, with someone who doesn't expect me to be anything other than what I am. What if what you are changes? What if a year from now you wake up and realize this was a mistake? Then I'll deal with it when it happens. But I'm not leaving because of something that might go wrong in the future. He wanted to believe her, wanted to let himself hope that this time, finally, it might work. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Do what? This. Trust. Partnership. Any of it. Neither do I, so we figure it out together. And if we fail, then we fail. But at least we'll have tried. She reached up and touched his face, her hand rough and warm against his cheek. He closed his eyes, leaning into the contact. Elias, look at me. He opened his eyes. I'm not asking for perfect, she said. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for real. Can you give me that? He thought about the 7 women who'd left, about the years of loneliness, about the walls he'd built to keep everyone at a distance. He thought about the risk of letting someone in, of allowing himself to care about whether they stayed or left. And then he thought about Marisol standing beside him in a blizzard, reinforcing a wall that was coming apart, about her learning to process an elk without flinching, about the way she'd called his stonework good and meant it. "Yeah," he said, "I can give you that." She smiled, and before he could overthink it, he kissed her. It wasn't smooth or practiced. It was awkward and uncertain, the kiss of two people who'd forgotten how to be anything other than alone. But it was real, and that was enough. When they pulled apart, Marisol laughed softly. "Well," she said, "that's a start." "A start? You think one kiss makes this a marriage?" "I thought the legal ceremony did that." "That was paperwork. This is something else." "What is it then?" She considered. "A promise, maybe. That we're going to try." "Just try?" "Trying is all anyone can do." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She fit against him like she'd been designed for it, solid and warm and real. "I'm scared," he admitted into her hair. "Me too." "But you're staying anyway." "I'm staying anyway." They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, two broken people trying to build something whole from their damaged pieces. Outside, the night deepened and the stars came out, cold and distant and uncaring. The mountains watched with their eternal indifference, and somewhere in the forest an owl called out, "Hunting." The next morning, they went back to work on the second room. But something had fundamentally shifted. They worked closer now, found excuses to touch, a hand on the shoulder, fingers brushing while passing tools. When they spoke, they held eye contact longer than necessary. By evening, they'd framed out 2 walls. They stood back, looking at their progress. "It's really happening," Marisol said. "The room? All of it." Elias understood. The room was more than just additional space. It was a declaration that she was staying, that they were building something together, that the future was worth planning for. "You'll have your own space," he said. "Privacy when you need it. Or we could share the main room and use this for storage." He looked at her. "That what you want?" "I don't know yet. Ask me when it's finished." That night, they sat together on the porch, closer than they'd sat before. Their shoulders touched, and neither moved away. "Tell me something true," Marisol said. "About what?" "Anything. Something you've never told anyone." He thought about it. "I used to talk to myself. First couple years up here, I'd have full conversations, ask questions and answer them. Got so bad I started forgetting which thoughts I'd said out loud and which I'd kept inside." "That's not that strange. I still do it sometimes. Catch myself explaining things to no one." "I've heard you." He turned to look at her. "You have?" "A few times. Usually when you're working on something complicated, you sort of narrate your way through it. And you didn't say anything?" "Why would I? It's not hurting anyone." He felt exposed but not judged. It was an unfamiliar combination. "Your turn," he said. "Tell me something true." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm afraid I'm not going to be enough." "Enough for what?" "For this. For you. I keep waiting for you to realize you could have done better, that there are women out there who are prettier or softer or more capable of being whatever it is a wife is supposed to be." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? You had 7 chances to find someone better." "I didn't want someone better. I wanted someone who would stay." "Because you think you don't deserve better?" The question landed hard. "Maybe." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." He almost laughed. "Is it? You built this entire life with your own hands. You survived 7 failures and kept trying. You showed me how to process an elk and didn't make me feel stupid for not knowing. You're patient and honest, and you don't pretend to be anything you're not." She paused. "So yeah, it's stupid to think you don't deserve better. You make me sound better than I am. I make you sound like what I see." They lapsed into silence. Overhead, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky. "Marisol?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat there until the cold drove them inside. That night, Elias didn't sleep by the fire or in his separate bedroll. He asked first, because that felt important, and Marisol said yes. They lay together in the narrow bed, fully clothed, not quite sure what they were doing, but willing to try anyway. "This is strange," she said. "Yeah. Good strange or bad strange?" "Don't know yet." She laughed, and he felt the vibration of it through her back where it pressed against his chest. "Wake me if I snore," she said. "You don't snore. How do you know?" "I've been listening to you sleep for 2 months." "That's slightly creepy." "I know." She fell asleep first, her breathing evening out. Elias lay awake longer, acutely aware of her warmth, her weight, the realness of her. For the first time in 7 attempts, he let himself believe this might actually work. Spring came slowly to the mountains, grudging and uncertain. The snow retreated in patches, leaving behind brown grass and mud that sucked at their boots. The creek swelled with runoff, roaring loud enough to hear from the cabin. Ice broke off the roof in dangerous chunks that they had to clear away before someone got killed. The second room took shape through April and into May. What had started as Marisol's space became something else, a joint project that neither of them could quite define. They built it together, arguing about every detail, compromising on most, refusing to budge on a few things that mattered for reasons neither could articulate. Elias insisted on double-thick walls for insulation. Marisol demanded a window facing east, even though it meant more work and more expense. They fought about it for 2 days before Elias gave in, and when the window was finally installed and the morning light poured through, he had to admit she'd been right. "Don't look so smug," he said. "I'm not smug. I'm just right." "Those are the same thing." She grinned and went back to chinking the gaps between logs. By mid-May, the room was finished enough to use. They'd built a simple bed frame, installed shelves, hung pegs for clothes. It was sparse but functional, and entirely Marisol's, except she didn't move into it. The first night after completion, they stood in the doorway looking at the empty space. "You want help moving your things?" Elias asked. "I'll do it tomorrow." But tomorrow came and went, and her belongings stayed where they were. After a week, Elias stopped asking. The room became storage for tools and supplies, and they continued sharing the narrow bed in the main cabin. Neither of them talked about what it meant. It felt safer that way. The trip to Leadville happened in early June. Elias had been putting it off, reluctant to leave the cabin for the 3 days the journey required. But they needed supplies, and the Pelts wouldn't trade themselves. "I should come with you," Marisol said the night before he planned to leave. "It's a hard ride." "I can handle a hard ride." "I know you can, but someone needs to stay with the stock. The stock will be fine for 3 days." "Marisol, you don't want me to come." It wasn't a question. He sighed and set down the pack he'd been organizing. "It's not that I don't want you to come. It's that Leadville is—" He struggled for the right words. "It's going to be uncomfortable. People are going to have opinions about us, about our arrangement. They're going to ask questions that are none of their business. So let them ask." "You say that now." "I mean it now." She crossed her arms. "You think I can't handle a few nosy townspeople? I think you haven't experienced how vicious people can be when they've decided you're living wrong. I grew up in a small town, Elias. I know exactly how vicious people can be. Then you know why I'd rather you didn't come." She was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You're ashamed of me." "What? No." "Then what is it?" "I'm trying to protect you from—" "I don't need protecting. I need you to treat me like a partner, not like something fragile you have to shield." He recognized the anger in her voice, the same anger from the day on the ridge when he'd caught her arm. She was right, and he knew it, but admitting it felt like giving up some crucial ground. "Fine," he said. "You can come." "Don't do me any favors. I'm not—" He stopped, forced himself to calm down. "I want you to come. I'm just worried about how people will treat you." "Let me worry about that." So she came. They left before dawn, leading a pack horse loaded with pelts. The trail down was treacherous with mud, and they had to dismount twice to lead the horses through bad sections. By the time they reached the lower elevations, both of them were filthy and sore. Leadville sprawled across a valley like something spilled and never cleaned up. Tents and rough buildings crowded together, smoke rising from 100 chimneys. The streets were thick with mud and crowded with people, miners, traders, women in bright dresses that meant one thing: men too drunk to stand even though it wasn't yet noon. Marisol took it all in without comment. They stopped first at the trading post where Elias usually sold his pelts. The owner, A man named Carver, with a face like a dried apple, looked up from his ledger. Boone, didn't expect you for another month. Had a good season. Carver's eyes shifted to Marisol, curious and appraising. Who's this? My wife, Marisol. The word felt strange in his mouth, more real than it had any right to be. Carver's eyebrows went up. Your wife? Thought the last one ran off. She did. This is a different one. How many's that now? Elias felt his jaw tighten. Does it matter? Suppose not. Carver turned his attention to the pelts. Let's see what you got. The trading took an hour. Carver inspected each pelt, pointing out flaws, a tear here, inconsistent tanning there. Elias had done this dance enough times to know when to push back and when to accept the critique. They settled on a price that was fair if not generous. While Carver counted out payment, a woman came in from the back room. She was maybe 40, wearing a dress that had been nice once but now showed signs of hard use. Her eyes went immediately to Marisol. This the new bride? She asked. This is Marisol, Elias said. Mary Carver. The woman extended her hand. How long you been up there? Since February. Mary's eyes widened slightly. You made it through a full winter, first try? I did. Well, Mary looked her over with new respect. Most don't last past the first storm. You must be tougher than you look. Or stupider, Marisol said. Mary laughed, surprised and genuine. I like you. You staying in town tonight? Haven't decided, Elias said. You should. Get a hot meal. Sleep in a real bed. The boarding house has clean rooms and Mrs. Chen's cooking is better than anything you'll make yourself. It was tempting. Elias looked at Marisol, who shrugged. We'll think about it, he said. They left the trading post with money in Elias's pocket and a growing list of supplies to purchase. As they walked down the main street, people stared. Some recognized Elias and nodded. Others just looked at Marisol with undisguised curiosity. At the general store, the clerk, a young man with unfortunate skin, couldn't take his eyes off Marisol. Can I help you find something, ma'am? He asked. Flour, sugar, salt, coffee, ammunition for a Winchester, Marisol said without hesitation. Also fabric if you have anything that's not complete garbage. The clerk blinked. Yes, ma'am. Right away. While he gathered supplies, two women entered the store. They were dressed well, clearly wives of mine owners or businessmen. They pretended not to look at Marisol, while obviously looking at her. Is that one of those mail-order brides? One whispered to the other, not quietly enough. Must be. I heard Boone's gone through half a dozen. Poor thing probably doesn't know what she's gotten into. Marisol's expression didn't change, but Elias saw her hands tighten on the counter. He stepped closer, a silent statement of solidarity. The clerk returned with their supplies. As he tallied the cost, one of the women approached. Excuse me, dear, she said to Marisol, her voice dripping with false concern. Are you all right? If you need help, there are people who can assist you. Marisol turned to face her fully. Assist me with what? Well, if your situation is difficult, we have a church committee that helps women in unfortunate circumstances. My circumstances are fine, thank you. Are you sure? Because there's no shame in admitting, I said I'm fine. The woman's face pinched. There's no need to be rude. I'm only trying to help. I don't need help. I need you to mind your own business. The store went quiet. The woman's companion put a hand on her arm. Come along, Martha. Clearly she doesn't appreciate Christian charity. They left in a huff. Elias paid for the supplies and they walked out. You okay? He asked once they were outside. I'm fine. They had no right. I know. But getting angry won't change anything. She looked at him. Does that happen often? People assuming you need rescuing? Yeah, usually they're more subtle about it. Well, they can assume whatever they want. I know where I belong. Something in the way she said it made his chest tight. Yeah? Yeah. They loaded the supplies onto the pack horse. The sun was getting low, and the decision about whether to stay the night was pressing. What do you want to do? Elias asked. Marisol looked around at the muddy streets, the rough buildings, the people who couldn't mind their own business. Then she looked back toward the mountains, barely visible in the distance. I want to go home, she said. Home. Not back to the cabin. Home. It'll be dark before we're halfway there, Elias warned. I don't care. I want to sleep in our bed, not some boarding house where people will gossip about us through the walls. Our bed. She'd said it without thinking, and the casual possessiveness of it hit him harder than any deliberate declaration would have. All right, he said. Let's go home. They made it about 10 miles before full dark forced them to stop. They camped in a clearing Elias had used before, building a fire and eating cold jerky because neither of them wanted to bother with cooking. Marisol sat close to the fire, staring into the flames. You're quiet, Elias said. Just thinking. About? About how strange it is that a town full of people felt lonelier than a cabin with just the two of us. He understood that completely. Towns full of people performing, pretending to be respectable, judging everyone else for not pretending hard enough, gets exhausting. Is that why you left? The pretending? Part of it. I got tired of having to explain myself, defend my choices, act like I cared about things that didn't matter. She looked over at him. Do you ever miss it, having people around? Sometimes. Mostly I miss the idea of it. The fantasy that more people equals less loneliness. But it doesn't work that way. No, it doesn't. They sat in silence, listening to the fire crack and pop. Overhead stars appeared in impossible numbers, so bright it almost hurt to look at them. Elias? Yeah? Thank you for bringing me with you, even though you didn't want to. I did want to. I was just scared. Of what? That you'd see what else was out there and realize you were settling. She laughed softly. Settling? For what? A town full of nosy strangers and fake politeness? I'll take honest isolation any day. Is that what we have? Honest isolation? We have something honest. Whether it's isolation anymore, I'm not sure. She moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her, and they sat like that until the fire burned down to coals. They made it back to the cabin by mid-morning the next day, exhausted and relieved. The animals greeted them with typical indifference, but the cabin itself seemed to welcome them back. Or maybe that was just Elias projecting. They unpacked the supplies and fell into their normal routines as if the trip had never happened. But something had shifted. The experience of facing the town together, of choosing to come back, had solidified something between them. That night, as they lay in bed, Marisol said, I don't want to go back there. To Leadville? To any town. I don't care if we have to make do with less. I'd rather be here with you than anywhere else with anyone else. The declaration should have made him happy. Instead, it terrified him. Don't say things like that, he said. Why not? Because what if it changes? What if next year or 5 years from now you feel different? Then I'll feel different. But right now this is true. That's not good enough. She pulled back to look at him. What do you want from me, Elias? You want me to promise I'll never change my mind? I can't do that. Nobody can. I want... He stopped, frustrated. I want to trust this, but I don't know how. So you're just going to keep waiting for me to leave? Maybe. That's a coward's way out. The words stung because they were accurate. He'd spent so long protecting himself from disappointment that he'd forgotten how to accept anything good. What do you want me to do? He asked. Stop treating me like I'm temporary. Stop hedging every conversation like I might not be here tomorrow. Trust that when I say I'm staying, I mean it. And if you're wrong, then I'm wrong, and we deal with it when it happens. But I'm not going to spend every day proving I'm not about to leave. At some point, you have to take me at my word. She was right. He knew she was right. But knowing and doing were different things. I'll try, he said. That's all I'm asking. She settled back against him, and eventually they both slept. But Elias lay awake longer, trying to figure out how to dismantle walls he'd spent years building. Summer came in earnest, bringing long days and hard work. They expanded the garden, planted more than they'd need, optimistic despite themselves. The stock thrived. The chickens, replenished with new hens from a trader passing through, actually started laying consistently. One afternoon in early July, Marisol was working in the garden when she suddenly stood up and pressed her hand to her stomach. You all right? Elias called from where he was repairing the fence. I think so. But she stayed there, hand on her belly, a strange expression on her face. Marisol? I'm late. It took him a moment to understand what she meant. When he did, the fence post he was holding slipped from his hands. How late? 2 months. Maybe more. I wasn't paying attention. They stared at each other across the garden. Are you sure? He asked. No, but the signs are there. I've been sick in the mornings. My breasts are tender, and I'm never this late unless… She stopped. We should probably talk about this. They sat on the porch, both of them too stunned to know what to say. I didn't think, Elias started. We were careful. Not careful enough, apparently. Are you? He didn't know how to finish the question. Happy? Scared? Angry? I don't know what I am, she said honestly. I hadn't planned on this. Hadn't even thought about it as a possibility. Do you want… Again, he couldn't finish. The question felt too big. I want to have this baby, she said firmly. If that's what you're asking. Relief flooded through him, so intense it was almost painful. Okay. But I'm scared. I've never done this before. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll handle it. What if I'm not good at it? What if I'm a terrible mother? You won't be. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She looked at him, vulnerability written clear across her face. How can you be so sure? Because you're good at everything you commit to. Because you don't quit when things get hard. Because you care about doing things right. He took her hand. You'll be a good mother because you'll work at it the same way you work at everything else. Tears welled in her eyes and she wiped them away impatiently. I don't cry. This is stupid. It's not stupid. It feels stupid. He pulled her close and she let herself lean into him. They sat there for a long time, processing the reality that had just crashed into their carefully managed equilibrium. This changes things, she said eventually. Yeah. We're going to need more supplies, a real cradle, cloth for diapers, medicine in case… We'll get it. And we'll need help. Someone who knows about birthing. There's a woman down in Clear Creek, midwife. She helped with some of the mining families. How far is Clear Creek? Half a day's ride. Marisol nodded, filing away the information. We should go see her, soon, make sure everything's developing right. We'll go next week. They sat in silence, both of them trying to wrap their minds around the fact that in a few months, there would be 3 of them instead of 2. Are you happy? Marisol asked quietly. Elias thought about it. Was he happy? He was terrified, overwhelmed, completely unprepared, but underneath all that was something else. Something warm and solid and real. Yeah, he said. I'm happy. Me too, I think. That night they lay in bed with Marisol's back against his chest and his hand on her still flat stomach. The reality of it seemed impossible, that there was a life growing inside her, half him and half her, something entirely new. What if I'm like my father? He asked into the darkness. What do you mean? He left when I was 10, just walked out one day and never came back. What if that's in me somehow? What if I do the same thing? She rolled over to face him. You won't. How do you know? Because you've had 7 chances to leave this mountain, and you've stayed every time. Because when things get hard, you dig in instead of running away. Because you're nothing like the man who abandoned you. He wanted to believe her. I don't know how to be a father. And I don't know how to be a mother. We'll figure it out together. What if we're both terrible at it? Then we'll be terrible together and the kid will turn out fine anyway because we tried our best. The simplicity of it was almost funny. They were 2 people who'd failed at almost everything, about to attempt the hardest thing either of them had ever done. And the only plan was to try hard and hope it worked out. This is insane, he said. Completely. We're really doing this. We really are. He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, trying to pour all the things he couldn't say into the contact. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. What? He asked. Nothing. Just thinking about how much has changed since February. Having regrets? Not even one. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in his life, Elias let himself imagine a future that included more than just survival. The trip to Clear Creek happened the following week. The midwife, a stern woman named Agnes who looked about 100 years old, examined Marisol with efficient thoroughness. You're healthy, she announced. Baby seems to be developing normally. I'd say you're about 3 months along, give or take. So, sometime in January? Marisol asked. Late January, early February? Winter baby. Agnes looked at Elias. You know how to deliver in an emergency? No. Then you better learn. I'll come up if the weather allows, but winter that high in the mountains, there's no guarantee. She spent 2 hours teaching him what to watch for, what was normal, what was dangerous. Elias tried to absorb it all, but the information felt overwhelming. Marisol took notes, her hand steady even though her face had gone pale. On the ride back, they were both quiet. You scared? Marisol asked eventually. Terrified. Yeah, me too. But they kept riding toward the cabin, toward the future they were building one uncertain day at a time. The summer passed in a blur of preparation. They built a cradle from pine and lined it with soft leather. Marisol sewed tiny clothes from fabric they'd bought in Leadville, her stitches careful and precise. Elias stockpiled firewood and food, obsessive about being ready for anything. By late August, Marisol's belly was starting to show. She moved differently now, more careful, protective of the life she carried. Some days she was sick. Other days she was fine. Elias learned to read her moods, to know when she needed space and when she needed closeness. One evening in September, a letter arrived via a passing trader. It was from Pritchard, the broker. Elias opened it while Marisol watched. The letter was brief and formal. It informed them that the agency had received Marisol's correspondence terminating their arrangement. It further stated that while the agency respected their decision, should circumstances change, they remained available to provide additional candidates. Elias read it twice, then handed it to Marisol. She read it once and threw it in the fire. That's the last we'll hear from them, she said. You sure? Completely. She looked at him, her hand resting on her belly. This is it, Elias. This is our life. No more backups, no more safety nets. Just us. Just us, he repeated. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. Fall arrived with the kind of beauty that made you forget winter was coming. The aspens turned gold, then burned orange, then dropped their leaves in a rush that left the mountainsides looking stripped and vulnerable. Elias and Marisol worked through the shorter days with focused intensity, both of them aware that time was running out. By October, Marisol's belly was unmistakable. She moved slower now, her balance thrown off by the extra weight. Simple tasks became complicated. Bending over to tend the fire left her breathless. Carrying water from the creek was out of the question. Elias took over the heavy work without comment, and for once, Marisol didn't argue. She focused on what she could still do, cooking, mending, organizing supplies, making endless lists of things they might need. We're going to run out of firewood, she said one evening. Elias looked up from the harness he was repairing. We've got enough for 3 months, maybe 4. The baby comes in late January, that's 4 months from now. So we're fine. What if it's a hard winter? What if we get snowed in for weeks? Then we burn the furniture. She threw a dish rag at him. He caught it and grinned. I'm serious, she said. So am I. We'll be fine. We've got enough of everything. Food, wood, water. Stop worrying. I can't stop worrying. Worrying is all I do now. He set down the harness and crossed to where she sat, knelt in front of her and put his hands on her belly. The baby kicked against his palm, strong and insistent. Feel that? He said. Hard to miss. That's a fighter, strong, healthy. Whatever happens, we'll handle it. You don't know that. I know you, and I know me, and I know we don't quit. She put her hands over his, holding them against her stomach. What if I can't do this? Can't do what? The birth. What if something goes wrong and I can't? Stop. Don't think like that. I have to think like that. Women die in childbirth all the time, especially out here with no doctor, no help. Agnes said you were healthy, said everything looked good. Agnes also said there are no guarantees. He stood and pulled her up with him, wrapped his arms around her as much as her belly would allow. Listen to me. You're going to be fine. The baby's going to be fine. And even if something goes wrong, we'll figure it out. That's what we do. She buried her face against his chest. I'm scared. I know. Me too. Really? Every single day. I wake up scared, go to bed scared, but I don't let it stop me from doing what needs doing. How? Because the alternative is worse. Being scared and doing nothing, that's when you really lose. She pulled back to look at him. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn. Same thing, maybe. That night, they lay in bed with the window open just enough to hear the wind in the trees. Marisol couldn't get comfortable, shifting positions every few minutes. "The baby's sitting on something," she complained. "Want me to rub your back? Would you?" He sat up and she turned onto her side. He worked his thumbs along her spine, feeling the knots of tension. She made small sounds of relief. "That's good, right there." "Here?" "Yeah." They were quiet for a while. Then Marisol said, "Do you think about them? The 7 before me?" The question surprised him. "Sometimes. Why? I wonder if they ever think about what they missed. If they're sitting in some comfortable house somewhere, safe and warm, and they wonder what would have happened if they'd stayed." "I doubt it. They probably think they dodged a bullet." "Maybe. Or maybe they know they gave up on something real because it was hard." Elias thought about the women who'd left, their faces already blurry in his memory, their names sometimes difficult to recall. None of them had been wrong to leave. The life he offered was brutal, isolated, unforgiving, but none of them had been Marisol either. "You think that's what separates people?" he asked, "whether they run from hard things or stay with them?" "Partly. But it's also about knowing the difference between hard things worth staying for and hard things that are just going to destroy you." "How do you tell the difference?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I think you look at whether the hard thing is making you smaller or bigger. If every day you're shrinking, losing pieces of yourself just to survive, then it's not worth it. But if you're growing, even if it hurts, even if it's slow, that's different. And this? What we're doing here? I'm bigger than I've ever been. And I don't just mean pregnant." He laughed, and she swatted at him. "You know what I mean," she said. "I do. And you're right. I feel it too." He worked on her back until she finally relaxed enough to sleep. But he stayed awake longer, thinking about growth and hardship, about the difference between suffering that destroyed and suffering that forged something stronger. The first snow came in early November, weeks earlier than usual. They woke to find 6 inches on the ground and more falling. Elias spent the day securing everything, making sure the animals had shelter, that the wood was covered, that nothing critical could get buried. Marisol watched from the window, one hand pressed against the glass. "It's starting," she said when he came back inside. "Just an early storm. We'll get a thaw before the real winter hits." But they didn't. The snow kept coming on and off through November and into December. By Christmas, a day they marked only because Marisol wanted to, there was 3 feet of snow on the ground and no sign of it stopping. They spent Christmas Day like any other, working and resting in the patterns they'd established. But that evening, Marisol pulled out the small wooden box she'd brought with her all those months ago, the one she'd never opened in front of him. "I want to show you something," she said. Inside were photographs. Her parents, younger than Elias had imagined. Marisol as a child, gap-toothed and wild-haired. A brother she'd never mentioned, who died of fever when she was 12. A life she'd left behind, captured in fading images. "This is where I came from," she said. "I wanted you to see it." He studied each photograph carefully, trying to reconcile the girl in the pictures with the woman beside him. "You never talk about them," he said. "I know, it hurts less that way." "Does it? Or do you just tell yourself that?" She looked at him sharply, then softened. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been running from grief the same way you've been running from failure. And now? Now I'm tired of running. I want to remember them without it destroying me. I want to tell our child about their grandparents, even if they never got to meet them." She put the photographs away carefully, and they sat together in the firelight. Outside, the snow fell steadily, building drifts against the north wall they'd reinforced together. "Elias? Yeah? I'm glad it was you. After everything, all the ways I could have ended up, I'm glad it was here, with you." The words landed heavy and true. "Me too." January came cold and mean. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. They kept the fire burning constantly, burning through wood faster than Elias liked, but unable to risk letting it die. Marisol was huge now, uncomfortable and anxious, barely able to move around the cabin. "How much longer?" she asked for the 100th time. Agnes said late January, early February. "That could be tomorrow or 3 weeks from now." "I know. I can't do 3 more weeks of this." "You don't have a choice." She glared at him, and he wisely kept his mouth shut. The labor started on January 28th, in the middle of the night. Elias woke to Marisol gripping his arm hard enough to hurt. "It's time," she said. He was up immediately, building up the fire, boiling water, setting out the supplies Agnes had told him to prepare. Marisol paced the cabin, breathing through contractions that came faster than he'd expected. "Should I try to get Agnes?" he asked. "You'd never make it there and back in time. We're doing this ourselves." The fear in her voice matched his own, but neither of them said it out loud. The labor lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of Marisol struggling and Elias feeling utterly useless. He held her when she needed holding, gave her space when she needed space, tried to remember everything Agnes had taught him, and felt like he was failing at all of it. "I can't," Marisol gasped during a particularly bad contraction. "You can." "I can't. It's too much. You're the strongest person I know. If anyone can do this, it's you." "That's a lie?" "No, it's not. You survived me. You survived 7 months of winter. You can survive this." She laughed through her pain, and somehow that made it bearable. The baby came as dawn was breaking, arriving in a rush that left Elias fumbling. A girl, tiny and red, and screaming with impressive volume. He caught her awkwardly, terrified he'd drop her, and handed her to Marisol. The moment Marisol held their daughter, everything changed. All the fear, all the pain, all the uncertainty. It didn't disappear, but it became background noise. What mattered was this small, furious creature they'd made together. "She's perfect," Marisol whispered. "She's loud. She's supposed to be loud. It means she's healthy." Elias cleaned up the mess as best he could while Marisol nursed the baby. He was shaking from exhaustion, from relief, from emotions he didn't have names for. "You did good," Marisol said. "I didn't do anything. You did all the work." "You were here. That's what mattered." He sat beside them, looking at his daughter's impossibly small face. She had Marisol's dark hair and his stubborn chin. Her eyes were unfocused, confused by the world she'd just entered. "What should we name her?" he asked. "I was thinking about my mother's name. Elena. Elena Boone." He tested it out. "I like it." "Elena Boone it is, then." They sat together in the early morning light, father, mother, and daughter, while outside the snow fell gently, covering the world in white. The first weeks were brutal in ways Elias hadn't anticipated. The baby didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. Marisol was exhausted and sore, trying to heal while also feeding a child who seemed perpetually hungry. Elias took over everything else: cooking, cleaning, tending the animals, keeping the fire going. Some days he was so tired he forgot what day it was. Some nights he fell asleep standing up. But every time he looked at Elena, at the small miracle they'd created, it felt worth it. "I don't know how people do this," Marisol said one night after the 4th time Elena had woken crying. "They just do, same as anything else." "That's not helpful." "I know, but it's true." She was rocking Elena, trying to soothe her back to sleep. The baby's cries were starting to quiet. "I keep thinking about the 7 before me," Marisol said. "Why?" "Because I wonder if any of them could have done this. Not the giving birth part, any woman can do that. But this, the isolation, the hardship, the constant work with no break and no help. Maybe they could have. We'll never know." "I think I know. I think they took one look at this life and understood what it would cost, and they decided it wasn't worth paying. And you decided different. I decided that everything costs something. The question is whether you're getting value for what you pay." Elias thought about that. "And are you getting value?" She looked at him over their daughter's head. "Every single day." Elena finally fell asleep, and Marisol placed her carefully in the cradle Elias had built. They both stood there watching her breathe. "We made that," Elias said. "We did. She's going to grow up out here, away from everything. No schools, no other children, no easy life." "I know." "You think she'll resent us for it?" "Maybe, probably, but she'll also know how to survive things that would break other people. She'll know how to work hard, how to value what matters, how to tell the difference between comfort and happiness." "That's a lot to put on a baby who's 2 weeks old." Marisol smiled. "We've got time to teach her." February brought a thaw, brief and deceptive. The snow retreated slightly, the temperature rose just enough to fool you into thinking winter was over. Elias knew better. He was outside chopping wood when he saw the rider coming up the trail. His first thought was that it was Agnes, coming to check on Marisol and the baby. But as the figure got closer, he realized it was a man, the broker's assistant, Wesley or Wallace or whatever his name was. Elias set down the axe and waited. The assistant dismounted, looking even more miserable than usual. "Mr. Boone, what do you want?" "Mr. Pritchard sent me. He received word that Miss Vega had given birth and wanted me to check on the child's welfare." "The child is fine. The mother is fine. You can leave." "I'm afraid I need to see them. For the records." "What records?" "The agency keeps documentation on all placements. It's standard procedure." Elias felt anger rising but kept his voice level. "You're not coming inside." "Mr. Boone, I don't think you understand." "No, you don't understand. My wife told your boss months ago that the arrangement was terminated. We don't need your agency, we don't want your interference, and you're not welcome here." The assistant's face pinched. "The agency has a right to ensure the child is being properly cared for." "By whose authority?" "By the terms of the original contract. The contract my wife voided. In writing." They stared at each other. The assistant clearly wanted to argue, but wasn't stupid enough to push a man holding an axe. "I'll report back to Mr. Pritchard," he said finally. "You do that. And tell him if he sends anyone else up here, they won't get a polite reception." The assistant mounted his horse and rode away without another word. Elias watched until he disappeared down the trail, then went inside. Marisol was nursing Elena by the fire. She looked up when he entered. "Who was that?" "The assistant. Pritchard sent him to check on us." Her expression hardened. "What did you tell him?" "To leave and not come back." "Good. He might send someone else, or show up himself." "Let him try." She looked down at Elena. "This is our family. Not his business, not anyone's business but ours." "Agreed." That night, Elias wrote a letter. He'd never been good with words on paper, but he did his best. He laid out clearly that the arrangement with Pritchard's agency was permanently concluded, that no further contact was necessary or welcome, and that any future interference would be met with legal action if necessary. It was mostly bluff. They had no money for lawyers, but it felt important to say it anyway. Marisol read the letter and added a postscript in her own hand. Elena Rose Boone was born January 29, 1876, healthy and strong. She is the daughter of Elias Boone and Marisol Vega Boone. She will grow up in these mountains, loved and cared for by parents who chose this life deliberately. We require nothing from you or your agency. Do not contact us again. She signed it and handed it to Elias. Mail it next time you go to town. When do you think that'll be? Not until spring. And I'm coming with you. With a baby? Yes, with a baby. Elena needs to be seen by people, needs to know there's a world beyond this mountain. And I need to make it clear to anyone who asks that I'm here by choice. He understood. The whispers in Leadville, the assumptions people made. Marisol wanted to face them head on, make it clear she wasn't a victim. All right, he said, we'll all go. March brought the real thaw. The snow began to retreat in earnest, revealing brown grass and muddy ground. Water ran everywhere, trickling down from the high peaks, swelling the creek until it roared. Elena was growing, becoming more alert, more responsive. She'd started smiling, real smiles that lit up her whole face. Elias found himself doing ridiculous things to make her smile, making faces and sounds that would have embarrassed him if anyone but Marisol was watching. You're completely besotted, Marisol said one afternoon, watching him play with Elena. I don't know what that means. It means you're hopelessly in love with your daughter. Is that a bad thing? It's the best thing. April brought the trip to Leadville. They packed carefully, bringing everything Elena might need and probably more. The ride down was slow, stopping frequently for Marisol to nurse, for Elena to sleep, for all of them to rest. Leadville looked the same as it had the previous summer, muddy, crowded, chaotic. But this time, Elias and Marisol walked through it together, with Elena strapped to Marisol's chest in a sling she'd made. People stared. Of course they stared. But Marisol met their stares with her head high, daring anyone to comment. At the trading post, Carver took one look at the baby and smiled. Well, congratulations are in order. Thank you, Marisol said. She's a pretty one. Looks like her mother. She's stubborn like her father. Mary Carver came out from the back and immediately went to coo over Elena. Oh, she's beautiful. What's her name? Elena. That's lovely. How old? Almost 3 months. And you brought her all the way down here? That's brave. Not brave, just necessary. They completed their trading and stocked up on supplies. As they were leaving, Elias mailed the letter to Pritchard. It felt like closing a door that should have been closed months ago. They spent one night at the boarding house, and true to Mary Carver's word, the food was good and the bed was clean. Elena slept between them, small and warm and perfect. You thinking about staying longer? Elias asked. There's a doctor here. Could check on Elena, make sure she's developing right. She's fine, I can see it, but yes, we'll see the doctor, just to be sure. The doctor confirmed what Marisol already knew. Elena was healthy, thriving even. He seemed surprised that a baby born in winter, in the mountains, with no medical assistance, had turned out so well. You must have had an easy birth, he said to Marisol. She laughed. It was 18 hours of hell, but we managed. Well, you've done everything right. Keep doing what you're doing. On the ride back, Marisol was quiet. What are you thinking about? Elias asked. About how different everything is now. A year ago, I was alone and scared, pretending I wasn't desperate. Now I have a family. Having regrets? Not even one. You? He looked at her, strong and capable, their daughter asleep against her chest, and felt something settle deep in his bones. No regrets. Not even about the 7 who left? Especially not about them. If they'd stayed, I wouldn't have you. She smiled. That's almost romantic. Almost? You could work on your delivery. I'll keep that in mind. They made it back to the cabin by evening. As they crested the ridge and the cabin came into view, Elias felt something he'd never felt before. The pure, simple joy of coming home. Not to a structure. Home to a place where he belonged, where people waited for him, where life was being built one difficult day at a time. Summer came again, bringing long days and hard work. But this time, there was Elena. She was everywhere. In the cradle while they worked, strapped to Marisol's back while she gardened, sleeping in Elias's arms while he sat on the porch at sunset. One evening in late June, Marisol was putting Elena to bed while Elias cleaned up from dinner. When she came back out, she stood in the doorway watching him. What? He asked. Nothing. Just thinking about how this was supposed to be temporary, just a survival arrangement. And now? Now it's everything. He set down the dish he was washing and crossed to her. You know what I realized? What? I spent years thinking I needed to find someone strong enough to handle this life. But what I really needed was someone who could teach me that strength isn't the same as hardness. I didn't teach you that. You did. Every day. You showed me that you can be strong and still let yourself care, that you can face hard truths and still choose hope. She looked up at him, eyes bright. You're getting better at the romantic thing. Practice. He kissed her, slow and deep, and through the cabin wall they could hear Elena making small sleeping sounds. I love you, Marisol said when they pulled apart. I should have said it before now, but I was scared. Of what? Of jinxing it, of saying it out loud and having it disappear. It's not going to disappear. I know that now. I love you too. In case that wasn't clear, she laughed. It was clear, but it's nice to hear anyway. They stood together in the doorway, looking out at the mountains that had brought them together. The same mountains that had defeated 7 others. The same harsh, beautiful, unforgiving landscape that had stripped away everything except what mattered. You think she'll understand? Marisol asked, nodding toward Elena. When she's older, when she asks why we live like this? I think we'll tell her the truth, that sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones, that comfort and happiness aren't the same thing, that a life built on honesty and hard work is worth more than an easy life built on pretending. That's a lot to put on a kid. She's your daughter. She can handle it. Our daughter. Our daughter. The sun set behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Inside the cabin, Elena stirred but didn't wake. And for the first time since he'd climbed into these mountains alone and desperate, Elias Boone felt something he'd stopped believing in. He felt complete. Years would pass. Elena would grow into a girl as stubborn as her father and as capable as her mother. There would be more winters, more storms, more challenges that would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. There would be arguments and failures and days when survival felt like the best they could hope for. But there would also be laughter. There would be mornings when Elena woke them too early and evenings when they all sat on the porch watching the stars appear. There would be the quiet satisfaction of work done well, of animals tended, of a garden that thrived against all odds. And there would be this: Elias and Marisol, standing together at the threshold of the life they'd built, knowing that every hard choice, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had led them here. To a cabin on a mountain, far from everything except what mattered. To a family forged in hardship and refined by trust. To a love that had survived 7 failures to finally get it right. The 8th bride had stayed, and in staying, she'd taught a broken man that the opposite of loneliness wasn't just company. It was partnership, built one honest day at a time. Elias turned to Marisol, and she turned to him, and together they went inside. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold in the dark. The fire burned warm. Elena slept safe in her cradle, and the mountain stood silent witness to the truth that some things worth having are only found at the end of a long, difficult climb.